Welcome to Living Chronic, the podcast that explores the realities of living with chronic illness and disability while redefining how we thrive in our personal and professional lives. I'm your host, Brandy Schantz, a disabled veteran and chronic illness warrior, here to discuss the challenges, triumphs, and untapped potential of life with a chronic condition. Before we dive in, please take a minute to hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening. Now, let's change the way we think about disability together. Hi, this is Brandy Schantz, and you're listening to Living Chronic. Today I'm here with Professor Brian Lowry. He is a speaker, an author, a professor. I'm really excited for this particular conversation because I love his insight into social psychology and the relationships that can shape who we are. It's been particularly of importance to me, so much of what you've talked about, particularly in finding out who you are as a person, because I very much struggled with learning that myself after becoming chronically ill and having to change my life a little bit. So, welcome and thank you so much for doing Living Chronic.
Thanks for having me, Brandy.
So, Brian, you talk about so many great things, but your TED Talk I really loved. I really loved. I actually watched it a few times because I loved a lot of what you talk about in there. And you talked about that intersection of achievement and finding meaning. So, could you expand on that a little bit, particularly for our audience who's largely either a family member of or somebody living with a chronic illness or disability?
Yeah, for a lot of people, I was going to say for young people, but I think it's true for a lot of people. Um, we find purpose in achievement, right?
Hmm.
So we're young, we're trying to figure out who we'll be and how if we're going to be successful, what that looks like, and we chase this or that. I don't know, school achievements as a young person, if you have that kind of predilection, or maybe it's sports achievement, whatever it is. Like you're chasing achievement as you get further along in life. You're chasing professional achievement. You're trying to make money. You're trying to be successful, and it often is what people think they're getting out of the bed for, right? And during the week at
Hmm.
least. And sometimes you feel like, well, I'm doing this, but then on the weekends I live my life, and you have this sense of trying to achieve and then separating that from your life. And both those things I give you a sense of purpose, that the sense of I'm getting out of bed in the morning for this thing, whatever it is. Again, often achievement, and we can confuse that with meaning. And this is a big part of what I say in the talk. And we have this sense sometimes that if we could only get this thing, grab the brass ring, or get this big house or whatever, we're going to be happy. The life will feel we will feel fulfilled, like life will feel meaningful, and that generally is not the case. And if you've lived long enough and had some
Hmm.
successes, you realize that, right? It's not, this is not something that is hard to see in most people's lives. And what I argue is that meaning usually requires caring for something beyond the self. In part, what we really want and need to have a sense of meaning, I suggest, is something like transcending the self, being more
Hmm.
than what is right now, being attached to or engaged with something more than just material success or
Hmm.
some particular achievement, because those things fade. What we really want is to expand beyond, this moment, or even what we can see in the future, and that I think requires a deep connection to other people.
I really love that insight, and I wish I had listened to you and, read your work when I first went through my own diagnosis because I've learned that I'm a lot like so many of us. I was very much defined by my career, my achievements, how much money I made, my athletic abilities, and how much I was able to win or get ahead or improve or all these things. And when I first was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, I kept thinking, well, I can just recapture what I was able to do in my career in a different way. But I never shifted how I would really do that because I kept thinking to myself, make money, improve in my career. And I never thought accommodate Crohn's. And then, of
Mm.
course, after I suffered my reaction, I kept saying, well, if I can just get back to triathlons and getting and doing my Ironmans, I'll be fine. The Ironmans, I'll be fine. And it took me starting this podcast in a way just to figure out what to do because I couldn't figure out how to wake up in the morning. And I always say I started the podcast to start crying, to stop crying, I should say. But what I found was when I started helping other people, and then I moved into new positions that I had never been in before, where I was helping other disabled people, both through state programs and through consulting work and policy. I really found that I did transcend myself. And that's how I finally healed. And it took years. But I think it's really important for, and I don't think we get it immediately, but I think it's very important for people going through large changes in their lives or something traumatic to understand that that is, it's not just, oh, if I can just get back to making over 300,000 a year, if I could just get back to being the head of this, or if I can just get back to my Ironman competition, everything will be fine. There's something else there. And that kind of insight you provide, I think, is super important for people like myself and my listeners.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I just finished recording an episode for my podcast. It's called "Know What You See" if you're curious about it, and I was talking about in an upcoming episode about how we'll all have to evolve at some point in our lives. That what we are now won't be available to us at some point in the future for all sorts of reasons, some of which we cannot predict and have no control over. Right, so you get a diagnosis of some sort, and it really upends your sense of who you've been and the things you can do. Or, it might be gradual. It's just aging. Like at some point, there are things that are
Mhm.
available to us that won't always be available to us. And that requires, at some point in our lives, and maybe to some extent continually, but for us to find paths to new selves that provide a sense of purpose and meaning. And that is tough because we aren't really good at predicting what life will feel like in a space that we've never been in, right? So you
Mhm.
get diagnosed with something, in your case, an example you gave, and you have this, and as you described it, like if only I could get here, it'll feel like this or feel like that, but you don't know what that will be because it's a brand new experience for you. We're really bad at forecasting how we'll react in those
Mhm.
brand new experiences, and so I mean, one, it requires some degree of experimentation. Right? You're going to try to be someone new. You're not going to get it right. Right? You're going to make mistakes because you're not able to predict how it will feel. So you'll try out things and beliefs or ways of being or behaviors that sometimes won't be quite right, that won't feel like they fit. And you know what? That's okay. So I think this need to evolve after some event or some change in your life requires giving yourself grace too, right? Like you're not
Mhm.
going to get it right. You don't know who that person is going to be. You are discovering who you will be. You are creating who you will be. You are not just, you know, you don't know what that is and how to do it until you've stumbled through it. And that's okay.
No, you're absolutely right. It's interesting. If you anybody who's experienced something like this, I'm in my late 40s, but so much of what I've gone through, I feel like I'm 18 again, 16, 17, trying to figure out what next. What should I do? Do I like this? Am I going to fail at this? Will I succeed?
Mhm.
It is a struggle, and being able to understand that I think is so important. It really is. So much of this also is very parallel to, you talk about shaping identity and how it's shaped by others. So can you explain how this dynamic plays out just in daily life, especially for people like myself navigating chronic illness?
Yeah, I mean, we have this idea of complete self definition, I think is wrong. We all live in communities, right? We all live
Hmm.
surrounded by other people. And the reality is, those people matter. And it's not as if you are who you are and they are who they are. And then sometimes you interact. No, it's you're constantly in, in conversation with those people. I don't just mean talking to them, I mean, there's a back and forth about who you are together, right? And
Hmm.
in close relationships, we understand this completely, right? So you have a child or you have a romantic partner you live with, people who are in your life every day, you have this sense of like push and pull about who am I and who are you, right? So if you have a child that's giving you a hard time as a parent, like you're trying to respond to that and you're wondering, am I doing a good job? Who am I here? What
Hmm.
kind of parent am I? What kind of person am I? Like there's this constant evolution of who you are in response to how they see you and who they are. It's true in all, like you can see this in close relationships. And my argument is that this is true in our life in all places. It's just harder to see in other situations. If you walk out and you see yourself as somehow there's some physical limitation, there's not something you're able to do that you could do before, and you're engaging with other people, like how do they see that? How do they see you?
Hmm.
Is going to be a part of how you start to understand who you are, right? You don't know, and you're trying to make sense of it in your environment. Other people are participating with you in constructing how you understand yourself. And I think that's a hard thing for people to sometimes take on board because it's scary not to feel like you completely self define yourself, or you completely self define. Um,
Hmm.
but again, with a little bit of reflection, I think it's easy to see that that's not the case. And that's not the case, not just for people who seem somehow outside of what we think of as the norm. That's true for everyone, right? When I step out of the house, do people see me as a man? What does that mean? Am I have to present myself as a man to them to understand who I am? And I'm reacting to what they think that means.
Hmm.
As a Black person, as an academic, all these identities that I have are reacting to and responding to and engaging with how other people see me. So it's not just want to be clear about this. I sometimes talk about, or I've talked about sexuality, right?
Hmm.
And I've had a conversation with people who are trans individuals, and the point I make is like we're all in the same position. It's just harder for some people than others in a way, right? We're all
Right.
navigating the social world and trying to be seen in a way that fits with how we see ourselves. And for some people, how we see ourselves more easily matches with how other people see us. And for others, that's less true. But we're all out there, you know, and in the mix of it, just trying to make it.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And, I think for many of us, we struggle, you struggle throughout your life in various ways. I know, I mean, I was a female Army officer. I knew that I had to act a certain way to, continue with that relationship with others and how they viewed me as a woman who is in the Army and an officer, no doubt. And now I find myself struggling because in my head, I still, and I'm sure this all happening at the cusp of my mid age didn't help, but I find myself struggling because I still see myself in a certain light. And when people who understand and know I have all these diseases, they look at me in a very different way. And I feel like I'm always kind of battling those two things while letting them know that. And I really just started becoming good at this, is, letting people know, no, you need to see me differently. And let me tell you how you should be seeing me, because this is what I'm able to accomplish as a person with Crohn's disease, drug induced lupus, and dysautonomia.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an everyday struggle, and sometimes, depending on who I'm speaking with, their vision of me reflects onto my how I feel about myself at that moment. Well, maybe I should be less active. Maybe I should be sleeping more or doing these other things that you're supposed to do in this world of being a disabled, chronically ill person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a strange thing to be forced to see that your identity is a negotiation with other people. Like
Hmm.
for many people, it's like it's so easy to accept the fact that how you see yourself and other people see you matches up that it doesn't feel like a negotiation at all. It feels like
Right.
it's just people recognize the truth. Like I'm this and everybody sees I'm that, and that's because I am. But when something shifts and then you start, the negotiation becomes more apparent to you. And that's what I'm talking about, negotiations of what you just described, right? Someone sees you in this way, you see yourself in that way. You're trying to get them to see you in the way you see yourself. That is a negotiation
Hmm.
over who you are. Like most people, most of the time, don't see it as a negotiation because it's so easy to come to an agreement. But
Hmm.
my point is like it's still a negotiation. It's just an easy one for most people. But that's
Right.
not true for everyone. And on some dimensions it's hard, and some dimensions it's easy for people. So it's really it highlights the importance of the fact that we are fundamentally social creatures.
Yes. Yes, we are. Um, yeah, those dynamics are very interesting. And I think, particularly as it pertains to living with chronic illness, I could probably talk about it for hours. It's a journey. None of us get to a good place quickly. And I think, you know, your insights are spot on. We are always struggling with this. We are always negotiating with others on how to view us. So, and for many of us, it's new. Maybe you're diagnosed very young. Maybe you're like me and you didn't get diagnosed until your middle age and you're trying to figure out what does this mean after living your life for 40 years or longer as one particular person. And now you have to adjust and explore and find again who you are as this new person.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think that we all go through that. It's just sometimes it's stark, right? Sometimes the break is very clear. Like person, I was this person at time one, something happened, and now I'm a different person. Like it's usually just not that clean for people. But there, I think if comparing it to other things like you were not a parent, you have a child, boom, you're a parent, right? There's just a
Hmm.
hard break, and there's like the pre and the post, the before and the after, right? But most of the times, it's like that line isn't as clear. But when that line is clear and the break is one that's hard to accept, or one in which on the after side people don't understand, I think that can be really tough for people.
Certainly. Well, and especially when there's fluidity to it. And for many of us living with chronic illness, you know, one day I'm outside and I am running. It doesn't look anything like it used to, but I'm running. And then another day, maybe I have to use a cane because I can barely move. Both of those versions of me are me. And I think, you know, when it's fluid like that, well, especially, you know, personalities, you know, everybody's going to look at it differently. Some people have their bad day and want to quit. um, I view everything as a challenge. It's a problem. Still working on that. You know, I'm also overly optimistic. If I run one day, I'm like, see, yeah, I'm going to compete again. You know, I won't, but I like to think I will. But I think that fluidity can sometimes be very difficult because it's not just a one change. It's day by day by day. And each day I wake up and I just don't know what person I'm going to be.
Yeah, I that's tough, and there's something about it that is just the nature of life. Like the
Hmm.
reality is
Yeah,
like life is like that, right?
it
It is
is.
fluid. Um, and again, I think the sense of stability is actually the delusion, right? The feeling that it's the same all the time is I think not right, but we it feels comfortable. So when we are allowed to see ourselves in that way, we do. But the reality is I honestly think that there's in all of us, life is churning, right? Every day is a different thing. Every day is a challenge. We just sometimes are allowed to use yesterday as a way of making sense of today.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's harder to do than others.
Certainly. And I think part of that too comes down to feeling included and being in environments that are inclusive. And that is another um, point you talk about a lot, and I really enjoy that. You know, this particular podcast is not a political podcast. I do advocacy work, and when I'm doing advocacy work, I always tell people I'm here as the party of my issue. I'm here as the party of disability rights. I'm here as the party of, you know, whatever it is that I'm, you know, trying to make happen. And I can, you know, I'm good at this. You know, this is what I do. I can sell you. Tell me what you find important. I will make this important to you. So, that being said, I know that DEI right now has all of the buzz and everybody's talking about it. I've been pretty loud and proud about however you feel about it, however you want to rebrand it. I think it's very important to hire with inclusivity for disabled workers, and there's a very good case study for it, and that case study is a business case study because this is very good for business profits, profit margins, the economy. I can, you know, hit this in every direction. It's good. You've talked a lot about building inclusive communities in respect to how we feel and those around us.
Mhm.
How do you feel about how that pertains to, especially, you know, marginalized communities in health, but also, you know, all of us as a society? How is this going to affect us, and how can we find ways to better include ourselves, include others, or feel included, particularly in the workforce?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, wading into this whole thing about DEI, I'll just say I said this to you earlier that I'm 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 not a fan of the political use of the term. That was before.
Hmm.
There's been a huge, I'd call it backlash to it. Also, I think that most people, at least people of good faith, would be on board with the idea that everyone should have a chance.
Hmm.
I don't hear people saying like, no, I'm opposed to everyone having a chance. I don't think people are opposed to everyone should be treated fairly. Like if they get a job, they should feel like they can come to that job and do their job and not worry about how the group they belong to affects how they're going to be judged. I don't think anybody is anti-equity in that sense. Like I've never heard anyone pro DI or anti DI suggested, no, I'm opposed to people being treated fairly independent of the groups they belong
Hmm.
to or their identities. And I don't hear anyone saying like, you know what, I'm for exclusion. I've
Right.
never heard anyone say that. So,
No.
in a way, those are things that I care about. I care about how we live together. I care about how we can provide an opportunity for everyone to thrive. Now, the language around DEI, the particular, I'm not gonna try to support every policy. Like I don't. Some of the policies I think, are good. Some of them are terrible.
Hmm.
So there's the idea of some kind of dogma attached to DEI is deeply problematic to me, and I think engaging in the conversation on those terms is a
Hmm.
mistake. Like I just don't. I just refuse to engage in those terms, meaning that I'm gonna defend or go against DE&I because I don't know what people mean by that.
Right.
Here's what I will defend. I will defend the right of everyone to live a positive life. I'll defend the right of everyone to have equal access to the goods that our society produces. I have no problem defending that in any context. If you have different abilities or you are struggling with some kind of disease, that does not mean that therefore you shouldn't have access to a good life. Like I don't.
Right.
And again, I think most people of good faith would agree with that. And where we differ on, like, I think again with people of good faith is how we achieve that. And I'm happy to
Right.
have a conversation about, like, I think this policy works and I don't think that same policy works. That's, I think, a completely reasonable conversation, and people of good faith can disagree. And they should, because we should try to find the thing that works best. So I think, um going back, I think to the root of this question, I think that as a society, we should care that everyone has the chance to be successful, to engage, to contribute, and that we should look for ways that allow that to happen and take into account that we are a diverse society. And that is, honestly, I think that's a good thing. That is a
It's
good thing.
very good. No, absolutely. It's very good. I sell people on hire disabled. That's my biggest message, particularly in my business. And disabled, chronically ill, healthy, black, white, first in your family to ever go to college, 40th generation to, get a higher education. Whatever it is, these different perspectives add value. We add value. And I am a different person today than I was 20 years ago, which is true for everybody. If you've lived that long, you're a different person today than you were 20 years ago, or at least I hope you are. But certainly, I'm very different in respect to the fact that my entire life has changed and I've been forced to learn to live life in a very different way. And I think that makes me a better employee. And I would say the same for many things. So, um, when I read a lot of what you're saying, what you've done and talking about building inclusive communities, I do think of that in terms of the workforce as well, because I think what we really need to be talking about is inclusion of everybody. This isn't an exclusionary process, and it shouldn't be. And if people don't like the word DEI, I say it all the time, then get rid of it. I'm not here to
100%.
brand things. I'm not in
Exactly.
marketing.
100%. I have this. I said I'm not. I don't care what you call it. I think the all the branding, it really honestly right now is quite troubling to me that somehow DE&I has become a brand, because people are like, we're going to get rid of DEI, and I'm like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
It's a political slogan, so sure, if you want to get rid of a political slogan, but is DE&I like Is it the 1960s? Is it Civil Rights Act? Is DEI
Yeah,
like the Brown v. Board of Education? Is DEI like accessibility rights? Like what are you going to get rid of exactly? Like you're going to get rid of things that support the ability of people from different backgrounds to contribute to society. That's what you want to get rid of. I don't think that's what people mean. So if what you mean is like the political fight over the particular policies, name the policies. Maybe I'm on board with you. Maybe there are policies you're
right.
like, let's get rid of this policy. And I might be like 100%. I agree. Or maybe I'm like, I'll fight with you about that. But that is a real conversation. It's hard for me to have a real conversation about a political slogan.
Absolutely. 10,000% agree. And I think these are the conversations we need to be having most often because for many of us, and that when I say us, I mean all of us really. This isn't one group. This isn't just my living chronic nation. This isn't just, just the black people or just the immigrants or, we're all coming from different perspectives and bringing us together in an inclusive way and focusing on what the desired outcome is. That's what I always say. What's the desired outcome? Is it to get into a fight with somebody about DEI? Or is it to make sure that people who are high performing employees have the access that they need? You know?
Exactly. I 100% agree. And this is why my general attitude is always going to be like, if we're having a conversation about DEI, you have to first tell me what you mean. I have
Hmm.
no position until I know what we're talking about. Right.
Absolutely.
And that I think is not allowing the debate to happen on grounds that don't make sense. Like it's not fruitful. It's not useful, in my opinion.
No, 100% agreed. 100% agreed. So, again, I strongly encourage everybody to definitely listen to your TED Talk, go to your website. You also have a podcast, Know What You See. You mentioned it a little bit
Mhm.
earlier. Tell me a little bit more about your podcast.
Yeah, the podcast this season focuses on the question of what's the point. So I interview a lot of people who are like, what do they do? And because people, when you give your life to things, and I mean that quite literally, right? Right now, you're spending a lot of time thinking about how people with chronic disease can engage with life more effectively and how people should think about this and how we make space for that in society and the workplace. And when you get up and you spend your time doing that, you're literally giving your life to that. And the
Mhm.
question is like, it's interesting to look at other people and what they give their lives to and ask why. Like, why are you doing that? Like, what
Yeah,
is it about that that is worth the precious time you have on this earth? Like, why are you thinking about that as much as you do? Why are you spending so much time on that? What is it about? What does it tell us? What does it tell me about how you live and how I live? And that's kind of the point of the podcast right now. It's examining, in some sense, how people live as a window into thinking about ourselves and how we're living, and maybe thinking about how we might live better.
I really love that. It's the asking the good questions and the why. And I really think a lot of what you're talking about is so important, particularly at this point in time. Asking people why. Why is this important to you? And having the conversation. Um, I really love so much about social media and what we have now with the internet because, I can find anything and everything and people and learn. I've learned so much about my disease, myself, who I am, where I want to be from others. Of course, a lot comes out of it that it isn't so great either. And one of those things I think is to just walking up to somebody and saying, "Hi, Brian, why do you do what you do?"
Hmm. I think we spend so much of our lives on mundane things,
Hmm.
right? So it's like, you have to do the laundry, you have to figure out what you're going to have for breakfast or what you're going to eat for dinner, you have to get yourself to work or get the kids to school or whatever. These are just tasks. And then it's easy to let that overwhelm our lives. Like, and for many people, there's not much space beyond how am I going to pay my bills and how am I going to take care
Yeah.
of the other necessities in my life and the people I care about in my life. And that can also devolve into grievances too on the negative side, where you're
Hmm.
upset that it's so hard, or you don't feel like you're
Yes.
getting what you should be getting and other people are, or whatever that is. And it's just I really lament how small life can be when we're overwhelmed by these
Yes.
mundane details and grievances. It's just we're just living a small life, and that's not meant to denigrate anyone. It's just I really mean that. It's like hard to pull yourself out of that because it's so much of what we're forced to deal with day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, stepping back and asking a larger question is really a chance for people to examine, is there more? Is there
Right.
more than just getting through the day? Is there more than just these like grievances born of frustration or boredom or a feeling of lacking something you
Mm-hmm.
deserve? What more is there, and how do we lean into that? Because I honestly believe if people can find a way to move beyond that space of these kind of mundane details, the
Right.
smallness of life, not their life, like just the smallness of life of anyone, that we'd all be better off. I mean, I think we would engage with each other differently. We would show more interest in other people's lives
Absolutely.
as a part of enriching our own lives. Again, not as like, for me, it's, I tell people sometimes, some of this, it looks like be a good person. And I'm like, live a good life and you will be a good person. And the question then is, how do you help people live better lives? And for me, what I can do is just help them as best I can to ask different types of questions about the life they're living, to pull them out of these small things and let them give
Yes.
them room to breathe and to think about their own lives a little bit differently.
I really love that. I think so often in life, we forget the basics. And I always love to go back to Maslow's hierarchy and remind people self actualization is way at the top. So if we, yeah, if we just take a step back, like you said, and ask the questions, that gives somebody who's still at the bottom struggling at that pyramid that opportunity to maybe touch that top for a moment. And it gives you an opportunity to interact with that person in a different way and understand in a better way as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I love this conversation, and I really, appreciate the work you're doing in this area. So, again, I really want to thank you so much for letting me have this conversation with you.
Now, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, I really love what you do, so much of what you're putting out there. I think and I just really think it is important. We got to have these conversations. We have to
Hmm.
take a step back. And, whether you're just trying to struggle and grieve your former self and get to that self actualization in some way, or if you're just struggling with what's happening right now in the world and asking yourselves, what can we do? Well, hey, you know what? Tune into your podcast, Know What You See, because that is a good way. And in your everyday life, ask somebody the question, hi, who are you? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree, and I'd also say the same thing for people listening. Like, keep listening to this podcast, right? It's a
Oh,
way to think about where you are and where you'd like to be, and that's a lot of what it is to be a human.
certainly is. Certainly is. That's an amazing thought to end on. Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate you coming on. This is a great conversation. I'd love to have another conversation. Like I said, I don't dive into politics or anger, but I do love taking things apart and saying, what is our goal and how do we get there? So I
Yeah,
love this conversation.
thank you so much for having me. I'd love to talk to you again. And I agree. It's a great way. I think moving beyond politics, politics are only a means to an end. If you don't know where you're trying to
Yes.
go, politics is just a place to be lost. So
Oh,
I
well
appreciate
said.
that
Very
position.
well
So
said.
thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brian.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Living Chronic. If you could please take a moment to rate and review and share this podcast, this is the best way to help this platform grow and create a community. In the meantime, you can follow along all the social platforms with the handle at Brandy Schantz on Blue Sky and X, and Chronically Brandy Schantz on Instagram and Threads. Don't forget to check out my website, brandyschantz.com. Have an amazing week and see you next time.